Socrates and the charge of impiety. Because of the amnesty, the charges made against Socrates were framed in religious terms. As recounted by Diogenes Laertius, January 5, 40, the charges were stated as follows. Socrates does criminal wrong by not recognizing the gods that the city recognizes, and furthermore by introducing new divinities. And he also does criminal wrong by corrupting the youth. Other accounts, Xenophon Memorabilia, 1I1 and Apology 11, 12, Plato, Apology 24b, and Euthyphro 2c3b. Many people understood the charge about corrupting the youth to signify that Socrates taught his subversive views to others, a claim that he adamantly denies in his defense speech by claiming that he has no wisdom to teach, Plato, Apology 20c, and that he cannot be held responsible for the actions of those that heard him speak, Plato, Apology 33ac. It is now customary to refer to the principal written accusation on the deposition submitted to the Athenian court as an accusation of impiety or unholiness. Rituals, ceremonies, and sacrifices that were officially sanctioned by the city and its officials marked ancient Greek religion. The sacred was woven into the everyday experience of citizens who demonstrated their piety by correctly observing their ancestral traditions. Interpretation of the gods at their temples was the exclusive domain of priests appointed and recognized by the city. The boundary and separation between the religious and the secular that we find in many countries today, therefore, did not obtain in Athens. A religious crime was consequently an offense not just against the gods, but also against the city itself. Socrates and his contemporaries lived in a polytheistic society, a society in which the gods did not create the world, but were themselves created. Socrates would have been brought up with the stories of the gods recounted in Hesiod and Homer, in which the gods were not omniscient, omnibenevolent, or eternal, but rather power-hungry super-creatures that regularly intervened in the affairs of human beings. One thinks, for example, of Aphrodite saving Paris from death at the hands of Menelaus, Homer Iliad 3.369-382, or Zeus sending Apollo to rescue the corpse of Sarpedon after his death in battle, Homer Iliad 16.667-684. Human beings were to fear the gods, sacrifice to them, and honor them with festivals and prayers. Socrates instead seemed to have a conception of the divine as always benevolent, truthful, authoritative, and wise. For him, divinity always operated in accordance with the standards of rationality. This conception of divinity, however, dispenses with the traditional conception of prayer and sacrifice as motivated by hopes for material payoff. Socrates' theory of the divine seemed to make the most important rituals and sacrifices in the city entirely useless, for if the gods are all good, they will benefit human beings regardless of whether or not human beings make offerings to them. Jurors at his trial might have thought that, without the expectation of material reward or protection from the gods, Socrates was disconnecting religion from its practical roots and its connection with the civic identity of the city. While Socrates was critical of blind acceptance of the gods and the myths we find in Hesiod and Homer, this in itself was not unheard of in Athens at the time. Solon, Xenophanes, Heraclitus, and Euripides had all spoken against the capriciousness and excesses of the gods without incurring penalty. Indeed, there was no legal definition of piety in Athens at the time, and jurors were therefore in a similar situation to the one in which we find Socrates in Plato's Euthyphro, that is, in need of an inquiry into what the nature of piety truly is. This new divine being is what is known as Socrates' daemon. Socrates claimed to have heard a sign or voice from his days as a child that accompanied him and forbid him to pursue certain courses of action. Socrates' daemon was therefore extremely influential in his indictment on the charge of worshipping new gods unknown to the city. Whereas in Plato's Apology, Socrates makes no attempt to reconcile his divine sign with traditional views of piety, Xenophon's Socrates argues that just as there are those who rely on bird calls and receive guidance from voices, so he too is influenced by his daemon. However, Socrates had no officially sanctioned religious role in the city. As such, his attempt to assimilate himself to a seer or necromancer appointed by the city to interpret divine signs actually may have undermined his innocence rather than helped to establish it. His insistence that he had direct personal access to the divine made him appear guilty to enough jurors that he was sentenced to death.